All right, well, hello and welcome everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Mandy Lee, the founder of Careers in Arbitration. We've just entered our 5th year of bringing you all the vacancies, opportunities, and competitions worth hearing about from the big wide world of arbitration, and things can only get bigger and better from here. Now, before we get started, let me make a quick housekeeping point. This webinar will be recorded. In fact, it is being recorded now as I speak. We ask all participants to kindly make sure that their microphones and videos are switched off during the webinar. After all, we are all here to hear from our speakers for now. The networking sessions will not be recorded though, so you will have the opportunity to turn your cameras on and ask your questions then. Thank you all in advance for your cooperation. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the first in a new series of webinars, 1,000 Paths to a Career in Arbitration. Will we have 1,000 episodes? Stay tuned to find out. Now, our host with the most, Jessica Rado, will tell you a bit more about what we have planned for you today shortly. But first, let me tell you a bit about Jessica, who is the architect of our new webinar series. Now, Jessica may be a force of nature. She recently obtained an LLM from Fordham Law School and is a litigation associate based in New York, where they are not presently having a heat wave of quite the same volume as the one the rest of us are experiencing in London. Vismoot alumni in the audience will no doubt be glad to hear that she is a passionate Vismoot coach. And in addition to developing this webinar series for Careers in Arbitration, she's an active participant in numerous ADR committees and organizations, both in New York and internationally. She also knows where to get the best ice cream in New York, which is a skill worth having and one that no doubt the gelato fans in the audience will be glad to hear that she possesses. Anyway, that is enough from me. Let's get the show on the road. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mandy, for the introduction, and thank you for the gelato shout out. Very, very Italian of me. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to see that you joined us, and I hope that this webinar will be interesting. Before we introduce our speakers and we start our discussion, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this new series and to tell you what the series is all about. So what 1,000 Paths to a Career in Arbitration wants to explore is that there is no one way to get to a career in arbitration. Even though it feels like a competitive field, it feels like it's really hard to get there, we hope that you will learn that you don't need to worry. There is no one right path, but there is potentially even 1,000. And every episode will have 2 practitioners that will share their story and tell us how they got there. For every episode, we will have a theme and a fun activity at the end. Now, our fun activity for today was networking rooms in different languages. I'm afraid we won't have as many Italian speakers today, so maybe we'll discuss that at the end if we want to just have one big room or not. But stay tuned because the next episodes will have other activities, including games and arbitration jokes, perhaps. We're working on it. But the theme for today is, how can I use my US LLM to pursue a career in arbitration outside of the United States? So do I have to stay in the US or can I go somewhere else, and how do I get there? And to discuss this, we have 2 exceptional speakers who are both Italian attorneys and both pursued an LLM in New York City. However, after the LLM, they went separate ways. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests. We have Camilla Gambarini. Camilla is a senior associate at Withers Worldwide in London, where she specializes in international arbitration, both commercial and investment treaty, and public international law matters. Camilla is dual qualified as an avvocato in Italy and as a solicitor advocate in England and Wales. Then we have Emilio Bettoni. Emilio is a partner at Arbitration, where he specializes in commercial and investor state arbitration with a particular focus on disputes linked to Spain and Latin America. He's also dual qualified in Italy and New York, and he's a member of the steering committee of the IBA ARB 40. So let's dive right into our questions, and let's start with the very beginning of their journey. So when is the right time to obtain an LLM? On one hand, we have Camilla, who graduated from Columbia Law School, and on the other hand, we have Emilio, who graduated from NYU. But how did you decide when was the right time for you to pursue this LLM? Emilio went straight after law school, finished his law degree in Italy, and then he went to NYU. While Camilla already had some experience and was almost done with her qualifying process in Italy. So Camilla, let's start with you. How did you decide when was the right time for you?
Thank you very much for the question. And first of all, thanks Mandy and Jessica for inviting me and for the great idea to organize this event. To answer your question, I will be very brief, but I just want to share my story. I graduated in law in Italy in 2009, and right after graduation, I did a master in international law at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. So sort of similar to Emilio. It was at the Graduate Institute in Geneva that I realized that, okay, I had to qualify and I actually wanted to practice international law and arbitration. So I went back to Italy and I joined an American firm as a trainee lawyer. So for the non-Italian lawyers here, basically we had to do 18 months, 2 years of training contract before being eligible to sit for the Italian bar exam. In those 2 years, I had the real luck to work on international arbitration matters, particularly with lawyers from that firm, American and London office, and I spent some time in London. And it was at that time that I started to realize that obviously I gained a good exposure to international arbitration and international law, but I really wanted to get a more deep dive into the common law and particularly understand how American lawyers think and yeah, so I thought after 2 years, 2 years and a half, maybe that was a good time for me to continue my education with something slightly, yes, academic, but still practical, because that's, I think, how LLMs in the US are compared to perhaps the master that I did in Geneva or some LLMs that you have in the United Kingdom. And so I think that I was at a stage where I was still very junior because, as you said, I literally qualified as a lawyer in September 2013, so a month after starting the LLM at Columbia. But I still had already a sort of an idea of what arbitration was, and perhaps this was something that was appreciated when I did some of the interviews that I had, and we can discuss that later. So that's why I wanted to do it in that moment. The other aspect is that the Italian bar, as some people may know, is a little bit of a lottery in the sense that you may study a lot and not necessarily pass it the first time. So luckily I passed it the first time, but I was like, look, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. So let me apply to an LLM in the US at the same time. So maybe I have a plan B. And maybe, as I will explain later, throughout my life, I always think about a plan B. I think it's important to be flexible, particularly in this type of arbitration world, right? So yes, that's why I decided to do my LLM in 2013 around that time.
That's great. What about you, Emilio? How did you decide when to pursue the LLM?
Thank you, Jessica. And first of all, before I begin, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this event. I'm very pleased to speak at the very first episode of this series. It's a pleasure for me. As you said before, I made my decision during my last year of law school in Milan. I'd always dreamt of studying in the US. And at that time, I thought that going straight from law school to the LLM would be the best option for me. And these mainly for two reasons. The first one is that I saw the LLM as a natural continuation of my studies. I had this passion about international law. And after having taken some courses at the university in Milan, I wanted to deepen my knowledge of that field from the perspective of a different legal system. And I always wanted to study in the US. I thought that the best universities were there, without taking anything away from the universities in the UK and everywhere else in the world, of course. The second reason why I decided to go to NYU straight after finishing the university in Milan was that my initial idea was to try to stay in New York after the LLM. And I thought it would be better to try this experience when it was in my 20s rather than in my 30s. Then life unfolded in a rather different way, but this is another story. I think we will discuss that later on in the webinar.
All right, thank you both. That's interesting to know. So we're gonna move on to the next step after the LLM. We're gonna go in a chronological order. So now we've decided when to start the LLM, and now let's talk about what happens after. So when graduation approaches, almost every US LLM student debates whether they should stay in the US or they should move back right away. So for those attending who are not familiar with the visa situation in the US, there's something called OPT, which stands for Optical Practical Training. And it's basically a work visa that is granted to, I want to say, almost every LLM students, because there are some exceptions. I don't want to give any immigration advice here, but there are very few exceptions that you should look into if you're interested. And so this is usually a great opportunity for students to just get out there, start working in a law firm or in an arbitral institution perhaps. And so we're curious to know, after your LLM, did you stay and work in the US using your OPT time, or do you move back right away? Let's start with Emilio.
The answer from me to this question is quite simple. I didn't stay in the US. I just stayed for the New York bar. So the LLM finished in May, and I stayed there for other probably 8 weeks in June and July. And at the end of July, I returned to Milan. So I didn't use the OPT.
What about you, Camilla?
Yes, I had the chance to use the OPT. I worked after the LLM as a foreign associate at King & Spalding in the Houston office and New York office. This is a job that I managed to obtain during the famous or unfamous LLM job fair that takes place in January, February. So, and then maybe we'll discuss this later. I participated in the job fair at the end of January, and around end of February, March 2014, I almost got my offer to stay. And so I started in the summer of 2013 until June 2014. And again, it was a foreign associate position with King & Spalding. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear that someone does get a job out of those fairs, because they always seem like they just interview you, they just want resumes, and that very few obtain a position. So congratulations on that. And I have a follow-up question, which I'm going to direct to Camilla. She did stay in the US. Did you plan this choice? Did you already know you were going to use the OPT, or is it something that happened doing?
Look, I didn't plan it. I dreamed of remaining in the United States, as I'm sure everyone here, once you're there, you're like, okay, why not, right? Because you have this option, so why not using it? But I've always been very practical and realistic about the situation, meaning that we know how competitive it is. We know how tough the market is. I knew that I could not be maybe an interesting material because coming from Italy, perhaps it's not the same as coming from Latin America. I arrived in September and half of my classmates already had a job at a firm in the US because they were best friends, this type of scenarios. So I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. The second bit is that I knew that I didn't want to go back to Italy and continue my career abroad because I wanted to pursue this career in a common law jurisdiction. And London has always been in the back of my mind because I lived there during my training contract. I spent a lot of time in London. And on a personal level, my partner had been admitted to do an MBA at London Business School in London. So I wanted to, I was thinking, okay, if it happens in the US, great. But obviously, London is the place where I want to be professionally wise, but also personally wise, because Emanuele was there. And so we thought that for both our careers, it could be the right place to be. So in a way, it has happened. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to lie, because some people are very bold and say, oh, you know, I was great, I got it. You can be great, but don't get this job. I think it was a series of coincidences, as it is in life. It's really destiny. So I went to that fair. I can tell you, I had only 3 interviews out of the 20 slots that you could have, okay? So I didn't apply to, I just applied to US firms and one Swiss firm, Lalive, we can disclose it. I mean, they are always at the job fair for arbitration. So I did 3 interviews and I was like, well, let's see, you know, if it goes ahead, great. If it doesn't work, we will figure it out. It's January, I still have time. And I think that, I don't know, probably, as I said, the fact that I worked a little bit before, but I was still junior, was of interest. And the fact that I speak Spanish was of interest as well, because King Spalding has a strong Latin practice. I was lucky, really, because, you know, I had classmates smarter than me that didn't get the job, but then got another job or, you know, moved back. So I don't think that getting a job in the US with the OPT is a reflection of how good you are or not, because I think it's really a competitive, it's just competitive, and sometimes perhaps even political. It depends what are the interests of the firms. So anyway, sorry, just I have spent a lot of time to say that basically it was not planned. It was sort of planned, but as I said, I wanted to remain flexible and see what others opportunities could come on my plate.
You know, we say there are 1,000 paths to our career in arbitration, but sometimes arbitration just finds you. So maybe it is a coincidence every once in a while. What about you, Emilio? Did you know you were not going to stay in the US when you started your LLM, or were you also see, you know, what happens and just going with the flow?
Well, as I said, answering your first question, Jessica, at the beginning of my LLM, I wouldn't have minded at all to stay in New York for a few years, but it didn't work out. And with hindsight, I think it was a combination of probably 2 factors. On the one hand, it was not straightforward to find a position in New York, as Camilla said, which was probably due to even my young age, because I went straight from law school to to the LLM, and perhaps even my nationality, which is not necessarily maybe appealing as other nationalities and legal backgrounds in the New York market. And on the other end, I think that having had the opportunity to join Arbitration, which is my current firm, also helped me deciding to stop looking for an opportunity in New York. I'm not ashamed to say that I was a bit disappointed at first when I was not finding a job in New York. But the opportunity I found with Arbitration made up for the letdown, and I think it worked out for the best, to be honest. Elaborating on Camilla's tip, that a plan B is always needed in our field. I had plan A, which was staying in New York. I had a plan B, and then life is strange sometimes, and I ended up choosing something that was neither plan A nor plan B, and I'm still with that plan after 10 years. So sometimes even plan B is not, I wouldn't say it's not sufficient, but it's not what you will end up choosing, perhaps.
Well, this is great. I think this is very encouraging for all of our attendees who are maybe stressing out about, you know, those who are just graduated and they're like, oh, I don't have a job now and it's a PT is starting. What do I do? I think this is very encouraging that there's a plan A, there's a plan B, and sometimes plan C just happens and it just works. So we just have to see what happens and stay strong, keep pursuing our dream and our career goals, and it will happen eventually. All right, so we chose the LLM, we talked about OPT, now let's talk about taking the bar. So for many students who choose to pursue an LLM in the US, one of the most appealing factors is that it makes you eligible for the New York bar exam, and many seek this dual qualification. However, even though both of our speakers today are dual qualified, Camilla decided not to take the New York bar, and Emilio actually did. So Camilla, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose not to take the bar, even though your LLM made you eligible for it?
Yeah. So look, I arrived at the end of my LLM pretty tired because I had to prepare for the Italian bar the previous summer, and I went straight into the LLM. And then I started working at King Spalding, which did not require me to have the LLM as a foreign associate. So I sort of parked it there and said, okay, let me think about it for the next year before moving back. The reality then was that at that point, I decided to move back to London. And I mean, we can discuss this in the breakout room. Of course, the New York bar is a nice to have, but what really matters if you want to work in London is the qualification as a solicitor. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to concentrate my resources and energy on passing the QLTS, which was actually a pretty long process, particularly if you do it while working. So that's the reason. Of course, it would have been nice to have a third qualification. Maybe one day I will think about it again, but after almost 10 years, I can tell you that it hasn't prejudiced me not having the New York bar. I mean, what every law firm asked me was the English law qualification here, and that's what they would ask you to do, even if you are qualified in the US. So yeah, it was a sort of a personal decision to park it and focus my energies on what I really needed for the jurisdiction where I was going to.
Right. Taking the bar, it's a lot of energy if you're just going to put it in your resume and not use it. So I guess this makes perfect sense. And a little bit of a different question for Emilio. So Emilio qualified, I want to say, less common order, because Emilio first took the New York bar and then went back to Italy and completed its qualifying process over there. So Emilio, having the New York bar, did that help you with the Italian bar afterwards? And did it influence your job hunt, perhaps, when you moved back to Italy?
Okay, so I'll take the first question and then move to the second question. So the answer to the first question is so and so, I would say. And I will explain myself better now. So having taken the New York bar was partly useful because when I sat for the Italian bar, I had already experienced the nice feeling of having to perform at my best for several hours and consecutive days in a huge room with hundreds of people, maybe in a dark room. And so, it's quite an experience. It's a bit intense. So when I sat for the Italian bar, I knew what I was going through. So it was not a surprise to me. But on the other hand, the New York bar and the Italian bar are structured quite differently. So on a more technical level, I would say that it wasn't necessarily helpful. And coming now to your second question, meaning if the New York bar helped me finding my position back in Italy, I think that the fact that I was sitting for the New York bar when I interviewed with my current partners 10 years ago was a plus, certainly a plus. But I believe that the outcome of the selection process wouldn't have been much different if I hadn't taken the bar exam in New York, because elaborating on what Camilla said before, the New York bar is a lot of energies. It's a lot of time too. It implies you to invest money also in taking the bar and sitting for the bar. And if your idea is going back to your home country, probably you don't necessarily need it. If you are planning on going back to maybe another jurisdiction, like an Italian or French or German, who wants to go back to London or wants to move to Singapore or Hong Kong, maybe, I think in those cases, it can be useful to show your potential employer that you're qualified in a very different system, and that you wanted to make the most of your experience in the United States. If you want to go back to your home country, probably is not necessarily a must-have. I would say it's a nice to have. It's not a must-have, I would say.
I agree on the nice to have. It's good for your CV.
All right. All right, so we took the bar and now let's move on to your current positions. So we have Camilla who works in big law, she works at Withers. And then we have Emilio who works at a boutique firm that focuses mostly, if not, I wanna say only, on international arbitration and litigation. So let's start with Camilla. Can you tell us 3 things or a few things that you really like about your law firm, about working in big law in general, maybe?
Yeah, look, I want to clarify one point on the big law, because obviously it's bigger than Emilio's boutique for sure, because we have 17 offices, so I recognize that. But I would not define Withers a big law as, we can name others, Warren Case, Latham, Norton Rose, these big monsters law firms, right? Why is that? Withers is a British firm that traditionally has always focused on private clients. And the arbitration practice was created almost 10 years ago. So it's really a sort of a little boutique inside a big institution, because as I said, we have 17 lawyers, so it's definitely not a small firm. So from my perspective, and I worked in what we call really big law firms, like it was a Debevoise, King & Spalding. So for me, there's a distinction between US big law firms and where I am at the moment, and I like to clarify that. What I like? Well, I like the fact that indeed it's a very specialized team, the one that I'm working in. We do international arbitration, commercial investment treaty, and public international law within a firm that has offices in other jurisdictions. So the advantage for clients, but also as associates, is that obviously you can work with attorneys or lawyers seated in New York, in Singapore, in Hong Kong. So you have really the opportunity to work cross-border on a daily basis with your colleagues. I mean, I'm not saying that if you work in an office that has just one office, you cannot do that because you would work as co-counsel, but obviously they are your colleagues, so it's easier. What I like about my firm, aside from the arbitration aspect, is that there's a genuine commitment to diversity, both in terms of LGBTQ, minorities, different people. And I'm saying this because, you know, I'm diverse, because I'm originally from Italy. I'm a woman in a jurisdiction where I was not born to. And my team is composed of all international people. So I think that's awesome, actually. And probably it's the nature of our practice. Of course, that's what arbitration is. But it's good to see that the firm has this genuine commitment to diversity, aside from the usual marketing posts that you can see on LinkedIn on key dates. The third point is it's a big institution, but still the approach that we have with senior lawyers or management is quite flexible. So decisions can be made sort of quickly. You feel like that you are really part of something that is growing. Of course, all law firms are law firms, right? So there is always a political element, I mean, as big institutions, and no law firm is perfect in my view. But I think that from an associate perspective, it's definitely more manageable than other institutions where I've been, because there's more connection with senior members of the firm.
That's great to hear. And thank you for clarifying that there is big, huge law, and then there is big, smaller law. That's good to know. And now a question for Emilio. What are 3 things that you like about your law firm, which is much smaller, I want to say, and that you also saw grow because you've been with the firm for 10 years already?
Yeah, much smaller than every kind of big law. So yeah, it's 3 things. So first, I would say flexibility in several respects. The way we structure our teams for the cases, the way each of us manages his or her own time during the week, regardless of the seniority. flexibility also in terms of economic arrangements that we can offer to our clients. The second thing that I like about my firm is the focus on quality. We don't work with accounting or billing department breathing down our neck. We prioritize quality and take the time we need to deliver a good product to the clients, even if we are above a cap that we agree with the client in the offer. That's not an issue for us. Third, I would say I like the fact that I always felt that it was part of an ever-changing project. As you said, I joined Arbitration when I was really young. We were 4 people at that time, 2 lawyers and 2 trainees, and now we are almost 20. So I've witnessed all these steps that took us from there to where we are today. And most importantly, I've always felt part of a project when I was, even when I was really young. So, and I think this is probably the reason why I'm still here. I felt part of a project. Yeah.
That's great to know. And I think congratulations on steering order, because you were named partner just this year, if I'm not mistaken. So congratulations on that. And we are almost done with our questions. We're going to move on to what I think our attendees are much more interesting, super interested in learning. And as you know, Careers in Arbitration is a feed that posts many vacancies, and our followers are actively applying for positions in international arbitration. So we're going to ask you the very big question. Let's start again with Camilla. What do you think a big but not huge law firm like Withers might be looking for in a young associate? What do you think makes a candidate stand out to work at a place like Withers?
Someone who's passionate and committed to his or her job, meaning you don't have to be just an international arbitration enthusiast, because everyone here is enthusiast. You have to be responsible for the work that you do. And I stress that because, as I said, in some big firms, when you have a team of 40 people, sometimes you can do a little bit what you want. No one watches on you. But in our team, like for example, in London, we are 15, which is, a pretty focused team just on arbitration. And if someone doesn't do his or her job, then that's a big problem. So I think that you have, if you've done an LLM, if you have participated in millions of conferences, associations, okay, it means that, okay, in a way you care about arbitration. But then you have to put into practice this commitment and passion, and no one expects you to be, the best advocate when you join, because that's something that is not expected from a junior. But if someone tells you, okay, you have to do this legal research, take the time to do the legal research. We have used Mundi, we have Investor State Law Guide. It takes 3 seconds to do a legal research, but copying and paste the quotes is not something that will help me. And it's something that I like to stress, because I've seen a tendency in the past few years from young generation to say, work done in 5 minutes. No, just take the time to do your job properly, because seniors don't want to redo your job entirely. You have to come up with an answer. So be good at what you're asked to do, and be responsible for your own tasks, because that shows that you are reliable. 2 other points. Second point, I think we don't want to see only people who are just passionate and good. Obviously you need to know the law, but also slightly commercial, in the sense that you understand what the needs of the clients are, right? If you don't have enough budget and you can work beyond budget, that's great, but sometimes it may not happen. So you have to understand that there are some economics behind, right, when you do your job. So be commercial, and even if you're young, you can be commercial. A third point, I think, is be a nice person. Particularly in my team, or in smaller maybe settings, no one wants to work pardon for the term, with jerks, right? Or people stabbing you in your back. Sometimes it happens. And I'm not here to say that you will find your best friends in your team, in your law firm, because you pick your friends, right? But try to be collegial and nice, because at the end of the day, as any job, but particularly this one, of course, we would spend more time working than with our families or friends. And I think it's important to be committed, but also have decent and collegial behavior, because it will be nicer and more fun to carry on with this job, particularly because there are many paths and ways to get to your position, but then you have to endure and stay in this field, because it's a marathon, right? It's not just getting your first job, it's getting your job, but remaining in the run. Remember, it's a marathon. So I think that thinking about your also social skills and social awareness is really important.
That's good to know. Nobody wants to work with jerks. That's a great quote, and I think we should all remember that. All right, same question for Emilio. What do you think in a firm like yours would be the qualities that a candidate should have to stand out and hopefully get a position?
As a premise, I agree with what Camilla said in several respects. I think the main traits we look for in a candidate for a junior associate position are eagerness to learn and improve. Nobody expects a junior to have the same experience and skills of a senior. What is important is for the junior to be willing to learn and improve, in my view. Second, we'll look for a strong academic background, and having an LLM is of course A+. Third, we usually end up selecting candidates who have previous experiences abroad, either as a student, a stagiaire, or an associate. And I would also add as a last point, but it's last not least, human qualities are important to us. We try to select professionals who are nice and kind, because we think that having a good vibe within the team is key to the success in this business. As Camilla said, sometimes you end up working long hours. You don't necessarily need to become friends of your teammates, but still being nice and kind to each other is fundamental. It's crucial. Yeah.
All right, this is great to know, and we're happy to see that the human qualities are part of both your tips and your priorities, I would say. So this is really good to know. We're almost done with our questions. So before we move to our networking moment, I have one final question for both of you. The LLM is an experience. It's not just a degree. It's not just classes. It's not just grades. There's a lot going on. There's moving abroad. There's meeting new people. There's experiencing new things. So is there something that you experienced during your LLM and that you cherish to this day? Let's start with Emilio this time.
The LLM is especially and mostly an experience, I would say. What I cherish to this day is the memories of having lived in the Greenwich Village, and some friendship that I built when I was at NYU, I would say.
I'm sure you don't miss paying the rent though for the Greenwich Village.
No, but the vibe is fantastic. It's just unique in the world, I think.
Can't deny that.
Yeah.
What about you, Camilla?
For me, it's the memory of Columbia campus. Every time I go back, I don't know, I feel in peace, and maybe are all the memories of my time spent there. So it's really the campus experience, which was like living in an American dream, right? Particularly because in Italy we don't have this type of concept of the university campus, and all the friends from all over the world that I met and are still my friends, even if we don't see each other every day, but we are all connected, and every day, I'm sure it's the same for Emilio, if we pick up the phone or text message, it's like, okay, I've seen you yesterday, and maybe it was 2-3 years before. So yeah, for all of you, I think it's important to focus, of course, on your grades, on your qualifications, or your job, but think that it's also an investment in terms of human beings that you will meet, because they will also be your colleagues in the future, lawyers who will pick up the phone and send you work. So it's really important to nourish these relationships.
That's great. That's great to hear from both of you. We are now at the end of our conversation. This completes our first episode of 1,000 Paths to a Career in Arbitration. We're going to do brief closing remarks now because we're going to close the recording of the session before we move to our networking moment. So for those that are signing off, or for those who will be watching the recording, we're happy you joined us. We hope you'll stay tuned for the next episodes. We're going to have more speakers from different jurisdictions and with different stories. So I hope you will keep joining us for those. And I think we can just close here, Mandy, if that's okay for the recording. Does that work?
Of course, absolutely. Let me just say on behalf of Careers in Arbitration, thank you very much to all of our speakers for sharing their many, many top tips, which I have been jotting down and sticking in the chat box to share with everybody on social media after the event. And thank you too to everybody who has joined us for today's episode, our maiden voyage along one of the many, many paths to a career in arbitration. So thank you, Jessica, for refereeing us or shepherding us down the first of those paths. And we will now stop the recording.